Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to study new chapter 5. Topic is called measuring cost of living. After uploading this PowerPoint, we'll start our lesson. So measuring cost of living. What is it? Let's go. In this case, we are going to study how much is cost of living, or in here, how to measure a cost of living. This is also very important. So cost of living, what does this cost of living mean? So how to calculate cost of living? Cost of living means how much money we spend to live, to survive in 1 month or in 1 year or in 6 months and so on. So inflation refers to a situation in which economy's overall price level is rising. So overall price, when it's increasing, we call this situation as an inflation. The inflation rate is the percentage change in the price level from previous year to the next year. To calculate cost of living, we use consumer price index, or in short we call CPI. What is CPI? The consumer price index is a measure of overall cost of goods and services bought by a typical consumer. So consumer price index is a measure of overall cost of goods and services in the So let's go on. The consumer price index (CPI) is a measure of overall prices, cost of the goods and services bought by a typical consumer. This is very important. So typical consumer, one consumer. So one consumer goods and services, changing goods and services, which is bought by a typical what consumer is called CPI, consumer price index, measure of overall cost of goods and services bought by a typical consumer. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports the CPI each month. In our country, we have Kyrgyz National Statistical Committee who calculates CPI every month. It is used to monitor change in the cost of living over time. And here, when the CPI rises, the typical family has to spend more dollars to maintain the same standard of living. And when how to calculate this CPI, consumer price index? First, we fix the basket. We determine what prices are most important to the what typical consumer. So NATS.com in National Statistical Committee identifies the market baskets of goods and services for a typical consumer buyer. The NATS.com, or National Statistical Committee, conducts mostly consumer survey to set the weight of the price of goods and services. So we have a basket like this. Let's see. This is the basket. We put to this basket what goods and services that we consume every day or every month to survive. So it might be bread, haircut, travel, costs, what else? So clothes and other goods and services that we consume in our life. So this basket does not include the goods and services that we don't consume. For example, change in the price of planes, for example, is not included to our basket because we don't consume planes or tanks or, let's say, helicopters, or what can we say? So the goods that we don't usually consume are not included to this basket. Only the goods and services that we usually consume are included to this basket. And the National Statistical Committee calculates the weight of this basket, how much money we spend every month, how much money we spend every year, and so on. So first of all, we fix the basket. We put how much goods and services we have inside the basket. Find the price of each of the goods and services in the basket for each point of time. So we find the prices of each good of goods and services in the basket for each point of the time. So how much is the price of the goods and services inside the basket? We calculate. And what do we do next? We compute the cost of basket. So we use price of the goods and services times how much quantity, and calculate the cost of basket in the what year. So we calculate cost of basket. After that, we choose base year and compute and calculate the index. So designing 1 year as a base year, making the benchmark against which other goods are compared. So compute, we calculate the index by dividing the price of the basket in 1 year by price in the base year and multiplying it by 100. So CPI, Consumer Price Index, how do we calculate? CPI, or Consumer Price Index, equals to cost of basket at the current year divided by the cost of basket in the base year multiplied by 100. So again, Consumer Price Index, or CPI, equals to cost of basket in the current year multiplied by the cost of basket in the base year multiplied by 100. After calculating the cost of CPI, we use change in CPI to find the inflation rate. The inflation rate is the percentage change in price index from preceding period. So inflation rate in year 2 equals to CPI 2 minus CPI 1 divided by CPI 1 multiplied by 100. This is inflation rate is calculated like this. This is just example. This is just an example. Okay. So we have consumers determine fixed cost of goods. We have 4 hot dogs and 2 hamburgers. We have 4 hot dogs and 2 hamburgers. We have in our basket, we assume that, so year is given 2001, 2002, and 2003. So price of hot dogs are also given. It is 1, 2, 3, and price of hamburgers are also given 1, 2, 3, 4. So what was our how many hot dogs we buy in one day? Let's say 4 hot dogs we buy, 2 hamburgers we buy. This is our quantity, and this is the price of each product in each year, in 3 years. Now let's calculate the CPI, consumer price cost of basket. How do we calculate? 1 hot dog times 4, one price, so $1 of hot dog multiplies by 4 hot dogs plus $2 for hamburger multiplied by 2 hamburgers. It is 8. Next one is 14. Next one it is 20. This is cost of basket. By using cost of basket, next what do we do? Step 3. Step 4, we find CPI. Consumer Price Index equals to cost of basket current year divided by cost of basket base year. In here we take 2001 as a base year. Okay, 2001 is the base year. 2002, 2003, we calculate changing here. Okay, so let's see. In 2002 it is First year it is 100 and 100, next one 175, and then 250. This is our CPI, or how do we call Consumer Price Index, or CPI. After that, what do we do? After that, what do we do? Here we have CPI 2001, 2002, and 2003. After that, we find inflation rate. Step 5. We use consumer price to calculate the rate of inflation. So 175 minus 100 divided by 100 multiplied by 100 is 75%. Next one, now from 250 minus 175 divided by 175 multiplied by 100, it is what? 43%. 43%. Now, next one is that can we calculate just cost of basket in order to find the inflation rate? Well, let's see. 8 if 8 is, sorry, is if 14 is 100, right? If 14 is 100, then how much it changed? How much it changed to if 14 is 100%, so 100% it changed it 100%. Six is how much percent? So 14x equals to 600. X equals to 600 over 14. 600 over 14. So if we calculate it, how much it will be? Let's see. 600 over 14 is 43%, almost 43%. So let's see from first year to second year. Yes, we see it is 43%, but it changed from second to third. Second to third, it is 43. Yes, first 75%, then 43%. Now, how the consumer price index is calculated? Calculating the consumer price index, their inflation rate. Another example. Base year is 2002. Basket of goods is 2002. Cost 1,200. Cost basket of goods in 2000 costs 1,200. The same basket in 2004 cost of 1,236, and CPI equals to 1,236 divided by one base year multiplied by 100 is 103. 103. The price increased by 3% between 2002 and 2004. 41% of the consumption goes for housing in our basket. 4% other goods and services. Yes, apparel, 4% apparel. Recreation 86%, medical care 6%, education and communication 6%, transportation 70%, foods and beverages 16%. You see, this is the how we call the CPI basket. Problems in measuring cost of living. We have some problems in measuring cost of living. What are they? CPI, an accurate measure of selected goods and make up typical bundle, but it's not perfect measure of cost of living. Why it is so? Because there are substitution bias, introduction of new goods, and measured quality change. So substitution bias, it says that there is no, for example, to substitute. For example, in your basket, you say that when government calculates our CPI, it says that someone eats a hamburger in the basket, so they put a hamburger in the basket. But when it changes, price increases, it might say that people continue to eat a hamburger even it is expensive, but not people will prefer the good that is out of the basket. For example, cheeseburger they might eat, which is not inside the basket, but the government will count that the person ate what not cheeseburger but only what hamburger. This is also one of the problems. Introduction of new goods. When new goods are introduced, government when it's calculating CPI, they don't include usually these new goods to the basket, and unmeasured quality change. Quality might be changed and price for because of quality price change, but governments it will say that they don't consider change in quality when they are measuring what CPI. So substitution basket, it says that the basket does not change to reflect the consumer reaction to change in relative price. Consumers substitute toward goods that have become relatively less expensive. The index overstates the increase in cost of living by not considering consumer substitution. So introduction of new goods, it means the basket does not reflect the change in purchasing power brought on by introduction of new products. New products result great variety, which in turn makes each dollar more valuable. So consumers need fewer dollars to maintain any given standard of living. Unmeasured quality change, it says that if the quality of goods rises from one year to another year, the value of dollar also rises even if the price of goods stays the same. If the quality of good falls from one year to another year, the value of the dollar falls, even the price of the good stays the same. So, statistical committee tries to adjust the price for constant quality, but such differences are hard to measure. The substitution bias, introduction of new goods, and unmeasured quality change, the CPI overstate the true cost of what living. The issue is important because many government programs use CPI adjusting for change in the overall level of prices. The CPI overstates inflation by 1% per year. So GDP deflator, how do we calculate? Nominal GDP divided by real GDP multiplied by 100, we find what GDP deflator. GDP deflator, second one, the index of different regions in the country, the PPI, the producer price index, which measures the cost of basket of goods and services bought by firms rather than consumers. Economists and policymakers monitor both the GDP deflator and the consumer price index to gauge how quickly prices are rising. There are two important differences between indexes that can them diverge. What are they? The GDP deflator reflects the price of all goods and services produced domestically, but CPI, Consumer Price Index, reflects the goods and services of all goods and services by consumers. So the difference between GDP deflator and CPI is that GDP deflator calculates changing prices in all goods and services inside which were produced inside the country, but CPI calculates change in price in only in consumer prices. So change in only the goods and services in the basket are calculated by CPI, by consumers. The Consumer Price Index or CPI compares the price of fixed basket of goods and services to the price of basket to the base year. And whereas the GDP deflator compares the price of currently produced goods and services to the price of same goods and services in the base year. This is CPI or inflation, and this is GDP deflator. The price index are used to correct for the effects of inflation comparing dollar figures from different times. So salary of in year divided equals to in year multiply the price level in 2001 over at that year divided the current year multiplied by base year, and here we go. So this is how we turn so the most popular movies of all times inflation adjusted. So it is Gone with the Wind, Star Wars, Sound of the Music, The Extraterrestrial, Titanic, The Ten Commanders, Jaws, Dr. Zhivago, Jungle Book, Snow White and Seven Drafts. So when some dollar amount is automatically corrected by inflation law contract, the amount said to be indexed to inflation. Interest represents the payment of future for transfer of money in the past. The nominal interest rate is the interest rate usually reported and not corrected for inflation. It is the interest rate and bank pays. The real interest rate is nominal interest rate that is corrected the effects of inflation. So you borrow $1,000 for 1 year. Nominal interest rate is 15%. During the inflation was 10%. Real interest rate, nominal interest rate minus inflation, so it is 5% here. This is the real and nominal interest rates, so nominal interest rate, and this is our real interest rate, which is less than. So in short, in total, what can we summary? What can we say about this? The Consumer Price Index or CPI shows the cost of basket of goods and services relative to the cost of same basket in the base year. So the index is used to measure the overall level of prices in the economy. The percentage change in CPI measures the inflation rate, and the Consumer Price Index is a perfect measure of costs, leading to the following three reasons: substitution bias, the introduction of new goods, and unmeasured change in quality. Because of measurement problems, the CPI overstates annual inflation by about 1 percentage point. So GDP deflator differs from CPI because it includes goods and services produced rather than goods and services consumed. In addition, the CPI uses a fixed cost of goods, while the GDP deflator automatically changes the group of goods and services over the time as the consumption of GDP changes. So dollar figures from different points in time to not represent a valid comparison of purchasing power. Various laws and private contracts use price indexes to correct for the effect of inflation. The real interest rate equals the nominal interest rate minus the rate of inflation in total. So this was the topic about what cost of living. Cost of living. So let's see here about cost of living. If you have cost of living.
Today's online lesson is going to reflect the information from Chapter 24, which is measuring the cost of living. Before we get into the actual material, the actual content, I'd like to show you a couple of graphs to illustrate the difference and distinction between different parts of the country and the cost of living. Here I have a graph of Southeast Florida, where I grew up, and the Miami-Fort Lauderdale metropolitan area, where I spent most of my life. In Southeast Florida, the actual today, is going to reflect the information. Today's online lesson is going to reflect the information from Chapter 24, which is measuring the cost of living. Before we get into the actual material, the actual content, I'd like to show you a couple of graphs to illustrate the difference and distinction between different parts of the country and the cost of living. Here I have a graph of Southeast Florida, where I grew up, and the Miami-Fort Lauderdale metropolitan area, where I spent most of my life. In Southeast Florida, the median home price in 2013 currently is $172,000. And you can see that this is different, of course, between other parts of Florida. For instance, Tampa is 128,000. Orlando, the metro Orlando area is a little bit more than that, 146,000. But nonetheless, this illustration of the various median home sale prices gives us an indication of how living in different parts of Florida can actually be more or less expensive. Now, taking a look at the distinction between Florida and Georgia, here I have a graph of Southeast Georgia. In and surrounding Brunswick, around Flint Academy, would be about 115,000. Out where I live, off of 82, is a little more, around 140,000. And you can see some of the various median home prices that exist in this area that we live in. So, the point of this is to show you that within a state or state to state, there can be a tremendous distinction between the cost of living in one place and the cost of living in another place. And the cost of living is essentially, what does it take me to survive, to live in a particular area, and based on what I'm used to living like. Here's another map which shows you the cost of housing around the country. And you can see that the pockets of red are going to be the more expensive places to live. And generally, you can see that this is along coastal areas, be it California, Washington, New York, South Florida, maybe even some of the interior areas of Colorado or what have you. But nonetheless, the cost of living is going to differ based on a lot of different factors, but housing would certainly be one of them. So the cost of living is the amount of money that is needed to survive, including things such as housing, food, healthcare, taxes, whatever it is. These will differ from state to state and even locally based on where you live. The cost of living will change. So this chapter looks at the cost of living and measuring the cost of living. When I was a kid, I used to collect comic books. It was just something I enjoyed doing, and me and my brothers would get into it, and at the time it was actually a pretty popular thing in society. It's become less popular as media and technology have changed, but back in the 80s and 90s, early 90s, I guess you could say, it was a really popular thing. So I have an issue here of a comic book that I used to have called Gru the Wanderer. It was one of my favorite comics. The very first issue of Gru that was released back in 1985 sold for 75 cents. So we fast forward to 2012, and The Amazing Spider-Man number 700 sells for $7.99. Okay, so what is this? Why did this happen? What am I trying to illustrate? See, back in 1985, a comic could cost you 75 cents, whereas today it could cost you almost $8. The moral of this story is that prices go up over time. This concept is illustrated by the concept of something known as inflation. Inflation is a general sustained increase in price levels. And over time, when we see prices go up, whether it's for comic books or for cheeseburgers or for whatever, this causes our money to hold less value. And if our money holds less value, then it can buy less. So inflation is an increase in a percentage from one time to another and the price levels in an economy. Not just the price of one thing, but all prices. We measure the percentage change based on what we call the inflation rate. Now, you've already learned one index called the GDP deflator, which showed us how inflation goes up and down over time, or prices go up and down over time. In this lesson, or this chapter, we're going to look at the second of the indexes known as consumer price index. Anyway, inflation. Prices go up, this happens, we know this happens. So a normal healthy rate of inflation is about 2 to 3%. In fact, if you look at the United States from 1914 to more current times, the average rate of inflation was about 3.38%. So most economists say and argue that a normal healthy rate of inflation is about 2 to 3%. Here's a couple other terms you need to know. When prices go rapidly out of control, they highly inflate. We call this hyperinflation. The most recent example of this would be in Zimbabwe, which in the late 2000s, saw their currency actually die. Zimbabwe basically printed their currency to the point where it was no longer accepted internationally. Another term is called disinflation. Disinflation is when the prices go up, but they go up at a slower rate. So this is a slowdown in the price levels in the economy. We also have what's called deflation. Deflation is typically what makes economists really nervous because that's indicative of economic decline and contraction. So when price levels actually drop, we call this deflation. And finally, we have what's called stagflation. Stagflation is effectively when prices go up, but the economy contracts. This is a combination of probably two of the worst things that could happen. Again, a contracting economy at increasing price levels. The most common example of this, or we will use in this class to refer to, is the 1973 energy crisis, which we'll talk more about in class. But it was at this time which we had an embargo placed on us by the Middle Eastern OPEC nations, which caused the United States economy to highly contract, while at the same time driving up the price of fuel and other products that are based on the gases and intermediate product. Now, why does inflation happen? There are effectively three theories to this. The first is called the quantity theory. Too much money, prices go up. In other words, you've got too much currency out there in the economy. If this happens, then you're going to have too much money chasing too few goods, and this is going to cause inflation. So in theory, ideally, the money supply should grow at the same rate of GDP. Theory number two, demand pull. We call this theory the demand pull theory, and this is a lot of what we talked about with supply and demand. Remember with supply and demand that if we saw a shift to the right in the demand curve, it pulled prices up. Well, this example that we're looking at here would be the price of just one product. But in our economy, if we see demand increase for all products, and we'll talk more about what that is later, you're going to see general price levels increase. So the demand pull theory relies on the theory of supply and demand, where demand shifts to the right causes increase in price levels. The final theory to why prices go up is called the cost push theory. With the cost push theory, we're also looking at supply and demand. And if you recall from class, when the cost of running a business increases, supply will decrease. So anything that becomes more expensive for a business is going to shift the curve to the left, effectively pushing the price of products in the market up. And so with the cost push theory, we're saying that the supply is shifting to the left for some product, and this is causing an increase in the price and the price levels in an economy. So whether it is the quantity theory, demand pull, or cost push, there are three basic theories to why prices go up. We'll talk more about this in class, and you can proceed to the quiz.
Which countries have grown the fastest in recent years? Many people might name Singapore or Korea. But Poland or Morocco might not readily come to mind. This is because for many decades, we have thought of national growth in terms of GDP, which shows the total value of goods and services a country produces. But what it doesn't show are some of the things that matter most to its people. Things like working public services, clean air, accessible education, safety from violence and harassment, and speaking freely without fear of arrest. So how can these factors be measured? This is where the Sustainable Economic Development Assessment comes in. Using 10 dimensions, it measures not only a country's economic performance, but its social and environmental sustainability, as well as the outcome of its long-term investments. Rather than giving a simple ranking, SETA shows where countries are doing well and where more work is needed. And using it alongside GDP reveals how effectively a country converts economic growth into improvements in overall well-being. So although GDP growth usually yields some quality of life improvements, a few countries have achieved impressive results without a great deal of resources. After announcing a focus on the safety and well-being of all citizens, Poland made some of the greatest strides in sustainability and governance through policies like funding for renewable resources and establishing a central anti-corruption bureau. Morocco's promotion of women's roles in politics and society, as well as equal rights in marriage and property upon divorce, led to greater gender equality, which correlates highly with overall progress. And the central program in Brazil's successful drive to cut poverty in half cost only 0.5% of their GDP. The lesson from these very different countries is that improving well-being doesn't require a lot of money, but it does require good leadership, clear goals, and policies specifically focused on making the country and the world a better place for its people.
Here's a question for you. In the last 20 years, has the proportion of the world's population living in extreme poverty A, doubled, B, halved, or C, stayed the same? Let's find out. To help us, enter the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs. In 2000, all member countries of the United Nations, that's almost the entire world, agreed to 8 goals to reduce extreme poverty. In a nutshell, the MDGs are the global promises to the world's poor. Let's take a look at each one and see how we're tracking. Number 1.
Today's online lesson is going to reflect
the global promises to the world's poor. Here's a question for you. In the last 20 years, has the proportion of the world's population living in extreme
today's on Today's online lesson is going to reflect the information from chapter 24, which is measuring the cost of living. Before we get into the actual material, the actual content, demand pull or cost push, there are 3 basic theories to why prices go up. We'll talk more about this in class, and you can proceed to the quiz.
Hi, I'm Adrienne Hill. Welcome.
So we have some questions in here. Let's solve them. So explain why an economist's income must equal its expenditure. So why economist income. Let me explain why an economist's income must equal economist's expenditure. Well, because income always must be equal to economy's expenditure, because when I spend money to buy this one, for me it is expenditure, and for the someone who sells this one to me, is for him it is income. That's why always in the economy income must be equal to expenditure. Second one, which contributes to more to GDP, the production of economic car or the production of luxury car? Why? Of course, the production of luxury car will be affected more to GDP rather than economic car, because we look to the what price value of the goods and services. Luxury car is much more expensive, which means it will be much more good than economy car. A farmer sells wheat to baker. The baker uses the wheat to make a bread, which is sold for $3. The total contribution of these transactions is how much it is. Uh, $3, because when we are calculating GDP, we just look for the price of final goods. That's why it will be 3. Many years ago, Peggy paid 500 to put her together a record collection. Today, she sold her albums at a garage sale for $100. How this affect current GDP? This will not affect current GDP, because it will be second-hand products. Second-hand products are not included or counted as a GDP. That's why it has zero effect. List 4 components of GDP. Give an example for each one. Question 5. So components of GDP equals the consumption, investment, government purchases, and the net export. Why do economists use real GDP rather than nominal GDP to gauge economic well-being? Because real GDP represents how production increased without any price effect. Our aim is, of course, to know how much real production increased, not change in price, but change in production is very important. That is why real GDP calculates only change in product. That is why this is important for us. In the year 2010, question 7, the economy produces 100 loaves of bread, sells it for $2 each. In the year 2011, the economy produces 200 loaves, that sell for $3. Calculate nominal GDP, real GDP, GDP deflator. Use 2010 as a base year. What percentage does each of the three statistics rise from one another? So if let's open one case in here. We have here, if I can open one. The economy year 2000. I could open somewhere here. Oh, can I write here? Let's see. No. So we have here 100 loaves. So quantity is 100. Quantity is 100. I want to open. Oh, let me write down here. Can I write here now? Quantity. Quantities. How much is? Sorry. Here is given, which is where is problems and applications. What's going on? Here we have. Here we go. Here we go. But it is not changing. Why it is so? I don't know. Maybe we should increase. No. Maybe we need to next page. Okay. Here we go. Year is given. Year is given 2010, 2011. Right. Year is given 100 loaves of bread. Bread quantity 100. And price of bread, which is $2. Here we have 200 breads for $3. Calculate nominal GDP. 100 times it is 200. This is 600. 600. Real GDP. We use the price of base year. First year again 200. And second year price is not 3 but 2, so 2 times 200, it is 400. This is real GDP. What else? Nominal GDP, real GDP, GDP deflator. Real GDP deflator. Nominal GDP divided by real GDP. First year it is 100. GDP deflator. Second year nominal GDP 600. 600 over 400. So 6 over 4, which can we say 3 over 2, which is 1.5 times 100. It should be 150. 1.5 times that is 150. We have applied to GDP deflator. What percentage change that is satisfied from one to another? It is 50%. 50%. And see, what's the desirable country to have large GDP? Give an example something that would raise GDP, it is productivity. Let's go on to the next question, problems and applications part. Okay, and here we go. Here we have so it says what components of anyway a family buys a new refrigerator. This is consumption. Aunt Jane buys a new house. It is investment. Ford sells Mustang from its inventory. It is consumption. You buy a pizza, consumption. California repairs highway 101, it is government purchase. Your parents buy a bottle of wine, French wine, it is annex, net export. fund expands its inventory in while it is investment. So government purchase components of GDP does not include spending on transfer payments such as social security. Explain why transfer payments are excluded, because the GDP calculates goods and services that are produced, but when you are in pension and getting a transfer payments in here, you don't work but you have income. You are not producing anything but you are earning money. In this case, you are not producing anything. Then when you are not don't produce anything, getting the money, then it is called, how do we call it? Is called that you don't produce anything. That's why you have no contribution to GDP. That's why it is not included to gross domestic product, or GDP in short. Here another thing that I wanted to share with you. So let's share another document. Which quiz it was, I don't know. So open, if I can open them. Oh, why it is not working here? Very interesting.